والسلام على نبينا مولانا Muhammad wa alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Welcome everyone. Welcome back, Sheikh. Good to see you. Hopefully you didn't take too much of a pounding in the wrestling. You look wrecked, but okay.
Thank you. I appreciate the compliment.
Okay. Inshallah. So, what distinguishes Iqbal, as I've been intimating in the previous sessions, from other great classical poets is that he uses his considerable poetic skill and traditional pedigree for a bigger purpose, for a broader political and economic purpose, and I guess ummatic purpose. That's a good word, ummatic. So, other poets have great aesthetic skill. They may be better poets, but Iqbal is a man on a bigger mission. And in his last work, Armaghan-e-Hijaz, we get a clear idea of this mission. So Armaghan-e-Hijaz is Iqbal's last publication before he passes away. So it's actually published posthumously, which means after his passing. And Armaghan-e-Hijaz means the gift from the Hijaz. And it's a very, very small book, and today most of the poems that we'll read are selections from Armaghan-e-Hijaz. And in this, we get this solid feeling that Iqbal knows death is coming, he's at death's door, and he's keen to summarize and summarize his agenda, basically, put it together in a sort of more like, in poems that pack more of a punch in, I guess. Maybe that's one way to put it. So, as we know, Iqbal wrote in a time when the Muslim world was doing pretty bad under the yokes of Western imperialism. And as Iqbal's life went on, things actually got worse and worse. Yet unlike others who advocated for an emulation of the West as a way out, Iqbal was actually very far-sighted in his critique of Western civilization and society. And we can really see this 100 years later. So in this first poem, Iqbal says, "Hai garche bulandi mein imarat falak bos, har shahar hakikat mein hai virana-e-abad. Though these soaring towers kiss the sky, these bustling cities are dead inside." And perhaps Iqbal was inspired by the Eiffel Tower, or maybe he saw pictures of New York City. But it's a very vivid metaphor. And of course, we have Usman Saab here, who's a respected psychologist, and he can tell us all about what it means for one of the world's richest societies to also have one of the highest rates of depression and mental illness. So these bustling cities are dead inside. In another poem, Iqbal, so he sees through the mirage of Western material progress. He says, Allah ko pa murdi momin pe bharosa, Iblis ko Europe ki machino ka sahara. God relies on the manliness of the true believer, while Satan has the aid of Europe's machines. This is the kind of poem that someone who lived through the age of World War I could write, because that was a time when we see human ingenuity and creativity at its ugliest, turned on its fellow man. And then somehow it got worse because there was another world war, and then they invented an atomic bomb. So, there are no limits to the excellence and the depravity of the human condition. And Iqbal often also critiques the way that Western political ideologies often project themselves. And we see this today, the West projects liberalism and human rights and likes to make fine lectures about its sort of civilizational superiority. But as Iqbal says, "Tune kya dekha nahi Maghrib ka jamhuri nizam, chehra roshan, androon Chengiz se tarik tar." Haven't you seen Europe's democracy? A shining face, but an interior darker than Genghis himself. But Iqbal's critique goes even deeper. questioning the Enlightenment's rejection of revelation and the preference given to faculties of supposedly impartial human rationality. In a poem called Lenin in the Presence of God, Iqbal writes with the mouth of Lenin, मैं कैसे समझता कि तू है या कि नहीं है, हर दम मुतगय्यर थे खिरद के नजरियात. How could I know if you are or you're not, if you exist or don't exist? For reasons, foundations changed with every moment. Now, as critical as Iqbal was of the West, he also spent equal time agitating against what he saw as deep problems in the Muslim world of his time. And so I'd call him an equal opportunity critic. He was astutely aware of the problems on all sides, and he wasn't chauvinistically wedded to overlooking the flaws of his own or society or the Muslims of his time. So here in a quatrain number 6 from Armaghan-e-Hijaz, he says, and this is in a sort of semi-sarcastic tone, so Iqbal's poems often have this tone of dry humor as well. Kaha Iqbal ne, Sheikh-e Haram se, teh mihrab-e masjid so gaya kaun? Nida masjid ki diwaron se aayi, farangi but kade mein kho gaya kaun? Iqbal asked the Sheikh of the Haram, here a metaphor, I guess, for the intellectual state of the Muslim world at his time, maybe. Who is it here that sleeps at the foot of the mihrab? But then a voice rang out from the walls of the mosque. So the Sheikh doesn't reply, but a voice rings out from the ghaib, right? Who is it that is lost in the idol houses of Europe? So what are the two critiques that Iqbal presents here? What do you guys think?
Saying that, I guess it implies that Europe is emasculate, since he says that God has the manliness of the true believer, and then the Europe just, Satan has the aid of Europe machines. So that implies that Europe has no manliness.
Perhaps. I'm actually referring specifically, to quatrain number 6. Yeah, so the first one on page 2. So there's two couplets here. So what is what is it alluding to?
Like Muslims sort of being devoured by Western ideology.
Okay, definitely, that's one. So there's this idea of Muslims of his time and even our time getting lost in the in Western paradigms, the idol houses of the West. And what's the other critique? GME? Okay. And what's the other critique that's put forward here?
Seems it's critiquing the Muslims in general of not being true to their principles, because the Sheikh is sleeping at the foot of the mihrab, even though he's praying salah, but the true spirit, and we went out those poems before as well, is still dormant.
It definitely. So this is a critique of passivity. He's saying the Muslims are sort of like sleeping, literally sleeping, or they don't have that fire and spirit that they may have had in the past. So there's a critique of passivity, and there's a critique of gumrahi, or being lost in the paradigms of a civilization that is sort of subsuming them. Now, in one of his very final verses from Armaghan-e-Hijaz, and I forgot to bring my copy of the Kulliyat. I was going to show you. It's literally like page 695 of page 700. In like absolute end of the book, this couplet comes, and Iqbal says, "Baki na rahi teri wo aina-e zamiri, ए कुश्ताए सुल्तानी ओ मुल्लाई ओ पीरी." Nothing remains in you of your conscience's reflection, O you victim of sultani, mullahi, and piri. So this verse actually summarizes Iqbal's critique of the Muslim world, and it lists 3 internal problems or enemies or obstacles to the kind of like ummah, the revived ummah he wants to see. So there are three enemies or characters or motifs, right? Sultani, Mulahi, and Piri, and we'll go through all three of them. So firstly, Sultani. Oh, I should say, these three critiques I think also reflect three different angles. So one is a political angle, one is a intellectual angle, and the other is a spiritual angle. So three different critiques. So Sultani obviously comes from the word sultan. And I think here Iqbal points to his desire to see the Muslim political imagination drawn anew. Iqbal actually sees a historic opportunity. So for Iqbal, the Muslim world, so you have this Khulafa Rashidun period, where you have like positive and noble political ideals translated into reality, but then that is subverted, and you then have a model of kingship. But then by the time Iqbal is at the scene, or in the early 20th century, kingship is also is a model of rulership and political organization that is losing credence all around the world. So things are changing. He sees an opportunity. He rejects kingship, and he also rejects totalitarian modes of religious autocracy. We'll go through that. He wants to see Islamic politics imbued with an ethics more genuine to Islam's message. And he's not afraid to adopt language of the West or look at the West and say, we can take something from here. Consider these two couplets. In his famous nazm, Iblis ki Majlis-e-Shura, the Council of Satan, Iqbal, through the mouth of Shaitan, says, Isse badkar aur kya fikr o amal ka inkilab, Padshahon ki nahi, Allah ki hai zameen. What could be a bigger revolution in thought and practice than this? Not to the kings does this belong, but this earth is God's. And this is really interesting. So the earth and everything on it doesn't belong to kings. So he rejects kingship. But if you look at the rhetoric of sort of Muslims who are really influenced by the West at this time, and I speak of Mustafa Kemal, I remember going to his mausoleum. Humanity belongs to the people, which is a very sort of European ideal. Anyway, it's very funny that, it's very ironic that this is written because Kemal is a military dictator, so sovereignty didn't really belong to the people at all. It belonged to him, and he forced whatever he wanted to force on the people. But, so on the one side there's the message of kingship, right? Where it's like everything revolves around the personage of the king. And on the other side you have these Western ideals where sovereignty belongs to the people in theory. But then Iqbal says here, no, this earth is God, so sovereignty belongs to God. In another poem called Al-Ardu Lillah, the earth is God's, he says, Deh Khudaya, ye zameen teri nahi, tere aaba ki nahi, teri nahi, meri nahi. O landlord, this land, this earth is not yours. This earth is not yours. Not your forefathers, not yours, not mine. Very powerful verse, and we can feel the sort of political and economic implications of what Iqbal is saying here as well, agitating against an unfair concentration of wealth and land.
It's a commentary on the rental crisis.
It's a commentary on feudalism maybe, but it could be a commentary on the rental crisis. Sure, if you want to read it as that. And inshallah we'll come back to this verse in our last session. So let's now consider some quotes from Iqbal's important prose work called Reconstruction of Religious Thought in Islam. In Reconstruction, Iqbal says, spiritual democracy is the ultimate aim of Islam. What's a spiritual democracy? Question to you guys. What's a spiritual democracy as opposed to a normal, everyday, non-spiritual democracy? What does this mean? Yes. if religion is separated from politics, then all that's left is the barbarism. Yes. Anyone have any other ideas? So they talk about two types of democracy. If we look into like political theory, there's something called thin democracy, which just sounds weird, and thick democracy. So thin democracy is this idea that a political system should be governed by like ideals of transparency and some sort of like fairness and justice, and people should have a say, some sort of say in how things happen and what's put on them. This is like thin democracy. And Iqbal would say, of course this is compatible with Islam. These are all Islamic values. And then there's something called like thick democracy, which is this idea that there's no external reference, and the only thing that determines the laws of a society are the people. And Islam would disagree with this idea because we have certain sort of fixed ethics and fixed laws, right? So like a Muslim society or a Muslim governance can never make gambling legal, for example, or make things that are haram, halal, so on and so forth. So if democracy means that ultimate sovereignty lies in people, then Iqbal would say this is incompatible, and we would say this is like not Islamic. But if democracy means fairness, justice, equity, transparency, and other good things, then we would say, yeah, of course, this can work. This is, in fact, what the Khulafa Rashidin also did in many of their political behaviors. So, for Iqbal, spiritual democracy is this idea of, fairness, justice, equity, that is guided by certain, like time-honored and eternal principles, basically. He says here further, the essence of Tawheed as a working idea. So Tawheed translated practically in a political sense is equality, solidarity, and freedom. The state from the Islamic standpoint is an endeavor to transform these ideal principles and realize the spiritual in human organization. So Iqbal is saying that the state, politics, needs to have a higher purpose. So whereas kingship in Muslim history is sort of all about the king, and maybe if the king feels like it, he'll do things that are conducive to Islam, but most of the time he's off doing his own thing, pursuing glory and luxury. So he says like that's not a good system. But secular systems also don't really have any higher purpose other than their own continuation. For Iqbal, state and politics, Islam should have a higher purpose. Now, he also says, this is now the second part of his like political critique or message. A being whose movements are wholly determined like a machine cannot produce goodness. Freedom is thus a condition of goodness. And he says, the ultimate fate of a people doesn't depend so much on organization, so much as it does on the worth and power of the individual. In an over-organized society, the individual is crushed out of existence. So now Iqbal is saying that, okay, we need like some sort of Islamic governance and politics, and it should have a high purpose, but how? Unfortunately, there are a lot of groups in the world today that claim to act in the name of Islam and Islamic politics, but they have a very, very harsh, very domineering approach. For example, the Taliban is a great example. Their idea of Islamic politics is like you have to force everything via the barrel of a gun. And we can and should make serious critiques of that. So Iqbal is saying we need to do this with a sense of spirituality and respect the dignity of the individual. And I think this is a very beautiful and very important thing to keep in mind. So these are the two sort of elements of Iqbal's political critique. So he sees a historic opportunity. Yes, things are broken. Yes, old systems have been destroyed, but we have the chance to make something new. Okay. Now let's talk about the second part of Iqbal's critique, which is mullai. So mullah is a derivative of the word mawla, which means master or teacher or friend or guide, and has a bunch of different meanings. So mullah comes from mawla, and then we have a word maulana, which literally means like our master, but has also come to just mean master. Mullah, maulana, mawla, these are originally terms of respect, right? Terms of honor. Maulana Rumi, Maulana Jami, Maulana Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? These are honorifics. But in Iqbal's time and also in our time, unfortunately, what he's doing here, he's actually referring to a type of sort of religious scholars, especially in the subcontinent, who are not really doing a great job talking about Islam and helping the community get to a better place with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We have sort of quite, in many places, subpar scholars in the subcontinent, unfortunately. So when Iqbal says mullai, he's participating in this cultural conversation around a kind of Islamic scholarship that is defined by kind of intellectual and spiritual stuntedness. Or he sees that the religion is blighted by a lot of clerics who are incapable of kind of dealing with the issues that modernity has thrown forward, or who are overly literal or close-minded or very, very sectarian in their understanding of rituals and religion. And we still have this today, unfortunately. So this is the second part of Iqbal's critique. Sheikh, if you had any thoughts on this, maybe you've seen kind of this phenomenon, or...
I mean, no, honestly, I think you've put it together very, very well. But Attas, Dr. Attas, he says that the root of the crisis of the Islamic world is not about politics, but it's actually of knowledge. And it's a crisis of knowledge, and I think that that's where Iqbal's is a lot more comprehensive, actually, because I think it's also not right to just reduce it fundamentally to just a crisis of knowledge. There's a crisis of politics and understanding of how to politically organize, and spiritually as well. And particularly in his time, there was a lot of corruption amongst the peers, and to this day and whatnot. So I wonder, I mean, I pass the question to you. I wonder what he would think of the, I guess you can say, rise of Islamic intellectualism, particularly in the West, and the way that it is starting to revive and discuss a lot of these things. I wonder if he would see this and what's coming forward as a positive thing, or if he would see it as something that is been there, done that. You guys are.
It depends. I think he would say, if I can presume to speak for him, he would say it depends on what are its epistemic principles or its assumptions. What is it rooted in? So, neo-traditional scholarship, the work of Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad and Attas is brilliant, great, and it's very intellectually thorough, and it knows its own premises very well. But then you have a lot of sort of more liberal Islam, capital L liberal Islam, which is whether it knows it or not, is just parroting a lot of what liberalism has to say.
That is lost in the idle houses of Europe.
Right. This brings to mind another point. Another reason why, unfortunately, we have a phenomenon of bad scholarship or bad, subpar scholars in the Muslim world, especially at Iqbal's time, is that when the European powers came, they didn't just destroy the political and economic systems, they also destroyed the knowledge systems, the traditional madrasas and everything that sustained them, the waqf systems. There was a whole system that sustained and reproduced and cultivated the scholars and the atmosphere necessary to sustain like a traditional God-conscious society. And one of the important things the Europeans did is they split the education system. So before it was one. If you were a religious scholar, but you were also adept in philosophy and mathematics and other worldly sciences, right? but the Europeans came and split the two, and then you had a secular education system and a religious education system. And what's happened is that the best and brightest go to the secular education system, and they become lawyers and doctors and enter the government and are trained in English. And often the people in the madrasa stream are sort of from the less well-off sectors of society, and also just not necessarily the best performing people academically. So that's also why you have this phenomenon, like the mullah phenomenon in a sense. So this is what Iqbal is referring to. So what the Muslim world needs is a renewed synthesis of these two streams. They shouldn't be separate.
If I can add one thing, one of my teachers says a lot, Sheikh Abdul Hajj. One of the things that is actually dangers of what's coming out of the West, he said that fundamentalism and extremism will die out in the Muslim world way before it will die out in the West. What he means by that is that a lot of people as well can have the luxury and privilege of adopting extreme and fundamentalist positions in the West and peddling them and canceling anyone who doesn't kind of agree with this and saying that, oh, you're just watering down the deen and these sorts of things, because they don't have to live up the consequences of those theoretical positions of, oh, we need to just straight sharia in this regard, and there's no concept of maslahah and public benefit and looking into different aspects of how the sharia is going to interact with the modern world, with global politics, with international law, all these sorts of things. No, this is all just watering the deen. He said that this mentality will stay in the West, because a Muslim guy can sit in his couch benefiting all from the Western kind of comforts and have the freedom to say things like this, and there's no consequence, versus a person in Afghanistan or a person in the Arab world. They'll have to live out the consequences of this, where they see ISIS or living under the Taliban in Afghanistan, wherever it may be. And so this is something I think is also a very important thing, because it gets to the point that you mentioned about sometimes when it comes to learning Islam, and this is something Dr. Samir Mahmood mentioned last Friday. I don't know if you were there.
I was there, yes.
Yeah. So he mentioned this point that I thought was really important, which is that studying Islam and knowledge is not just about getting the bare bone facts of your aqidah and your fiqh and your usul, but it's recognizing that how does that knowledge interact at every level of the world, from politics to communities to families to relationship dynamics to whatever it may be. And this step of taking the knowledge, the data, the empirical, not the empirical, the raw data, you can say, the Quran and the Sunnah, the hard sciences, the pure Islamic sciences, it's not enough. You have to have the intellectual capacity to be able to integrate and to be able to understand how they apply at these levels. And that takes a lot of intellectual capacity. And unfortunately, what happens is that people are stuck into one. And when you look into the Sahaba, they did that. People think that you look into the Salaf, it was just, oh, these are just literalists or these sorts of things. But they did that. They knew how to be visionaries and how to make decisions that were not from the text, but flowed from the texts. So I think this is an important point for all of us to keep in mind about intellectual sophistication, how important it is, because without it, that's what the West wants. The West wants a dumbed-down version of Islam, and mullahs to come out and Islamic scholars to be so simplistic that their rhetoric has no actual relevance and no actual force or teeth in this world. That's what they want. And it's important for us to be able to balance between going ultra-liberal, but at the same time, kind of extreme fundamentalist as well. Sorry if I'm not as coherent.
That's fine.
Wrestling my brains a bit.
Okay. So in this poem, Mullah-e-Haram, Mullah of the Mosque or Mullah of the Haram, Iqbal says, Ajab nahi ke khuda tak teri rasai ho, teri nigah se hai poshida aadmi ka maqam. तेरी नमाज में बाकी जलाल है ना जमाल, तेरी आज़ाम में नहीं है मेरी सहर का पयाम. It's no surprise that, of course, you have a connection to the Lord. So this is a sort of sardonic or sarcastic tone. It's no surprise that you have a connection to the Lord, of course, O Mullah. Yet hidden from you is the maqam of the human. Your prayer has neither glory nor beauty, and your azan carries not the message of my dawn. Okay. we'll keep going. In another poem, Mullah or Bahisht, the Mullah in Heaven, Iqbal says, also sardonically, मैं भी हाजिर था वहाँ ज़ब्ते सुखन कर ना सका हक से जब हज़रत मौला को मिला हुक्म बहिश्त अर्ज़ की मैंने इलाही मेरी तकसीर मुआफ़ खुश ना आएंगे इससे हूर व शराब व लबे किश्त. I too was there and couldn't contain my speech from speaking the haqq when the exalted mullah received the commandments from heaven. I pleaded, O Lord, forgive my imprudence. He wouldn't even be happy with the hurs and the wine of heaven. Nahi firdos maqam jadal o qaal o aqwal. Bahas o takrar is Allah ke bande ki sarisht. है बद आमोज़ी अक़वाम व मिलल काम उसका और जन्नत में ना मस्जिद ना कलीसा ना कुनिश्त. For Firdaus is no place for arguments and debates and quarrels, yet still dispute and squabble is in his disposition. His vocation is ensnaring nations and sects in said squabbles, yet heaven has no mosque or no church or no temple. I think what Iqbal is saying here is he's pointing to a psychological or a spiritual aspect of the mullah phenomenon or subpar scholarship, is that it can often be driven by ego. And he wants Muslims to be able to rise above, of course, ego and be able to manage difference in a mature way. And unfortunately, you have sometimes overly sectarian scholarship that just gets so bogged down in ultimately not very important points of difference, even in clothing or something like that. And he wants us to go beyond that. And he says, heaven has no mosque, no church, no temple, in the sense that we need to look beyond sort of ritual and think of the bigger picture of Islam on a spiritual level as well. Ultimately, it's about cleansing the self and moving on a path towards God, right? And on a communal level, it's about fostering a society of individuals that can also do that. Okay. Now, this is the second phenomenon, the Mullai phenomenon. The third enemy or the third part of Iqbal's critique is piri. So, piri is a noun from the adjective pir. A pir is like a leader or a sheikh or a guide, right? Here, Iqbal is making a critique of a fatalistic and passive kind of Sufism. And this comes up a lot in his poetry, again and again, because it really permeated the milieu around him. Now, it's not that he was against tasawwuf, or it was not that he was against the idea of like having a peer, right? Iqbal is a Sufi. His father is a Sufi. Iqbal's self-declared peer is Maulana Rumi. So in Javed Nama, Iqbal writes of him and Maulana Rumi going on a journey through the stars. So Rumi is his peer. But Iqbal is very critical of a certain type of spirituality that preaches turning off from the world. And that leaves religion irrelevant, of course, in the affairs of the world, and kind of numbs the mind and turns the focus only inwards. He's very critical of that. Here in Ghazal 15 of Armaghan-e-Hijaz, he says, खबर नहीं क्या है नाम उसका खुदा फरेबी या खुद फरेबी अमल से फारिग हुआ मुसलमान बना के तकदीर का बहाना. I know not what to name this. Is it God deception or self-deception? The Muslim has absolved himself from action with the excuse of destiny. So, what can we do? Okay, inshallah, Mahdi will come. Mahdi will come, and everything will be fixed. What can we do? Just this is an attitude that exists in the Muslim world, and Iqbal agitates against it. Another part of this actually is the unfortunate, I think you talked about this, Sheikh, once, the unfortunate prevalence of conspiracy theories in the modern Muslim psyche. It's like, yaar ye Yahood har cheez ke piche hai. These Jews are behind everything. And har cheez ke piche America hai. America is behind everything. This is part of this phenomenon Iqbal critiques. This is a self-deception. It's a kind of passivity. It's like, what can we do? These people are somehow superhuman and they know everything and they do everything and the entire world turns at their fingertips, which is not the case. You know, they're just better organized, basically, right? And inshallah, we can also work on ourselves and do better. So there is a conspiracy theory mindset, which I don't think is very helpful, and it's also a kind of passivity and a kind of fatalism. However, I once heard an intellectual describe this mindset as a reflection of a collective post-traumatic stress disorder in the Muslim world. So the Muslim world has been through so much turmoil, so much external interference, so much trauma, that this is in a sense maybe like a mass kind of response to, like a mass psychological response. It's like, well, what is the point? We try and we elect a leader and then he gets removed down the line and ye hota hai and this happens and that happens and what can we do? So that's a more sympathetic perspective to the conspiracy theory mindset, if I was to be fair to it as well. Okay. In quatrain 11, Iqbal says, तेरे दरिया में तूफान क्यों नहीं है, खुदी तेरी मुसलमान क्यों नहीं है, अबस है शिकवाए तकदीर याज़दां, तू खुद तकदीर याज़दां क्यों नहीं है. Why is your ocean not roiling with storms? Why is your khudi not Muslim? Complaining of God's decree or destiny is a waste. Why are you yourself not God's destiny? And the idea here is that the Muslim who has elevated his self, his nafs, who has purified himself, will be a reflection of God's commands, will be a reflection of God's will. So he's saying, why is your khudi not Muslim? You complain, but where is your action, internal and external? You should be at a point where what you do is the destiny, in a sense.
I just want to quote, if that's okay. I read this quote, I thought it was really interesting. So someone said, I wanted to ask God, why do you allow so much evil, suffering and poverty in the world? But I was worried that God might ask me the same question.
Yes. Sheikh Umar Sulaiman said this in a recent talk. Maybe he took it from somewhere else, I don't know, but it's a brilliant... Right, you got it from Abid, yeah. It's brilliant, yes. Thank you for sharing that. In the last few verses of Iblis ki Majlis Shura, Council of Satan, Iqbal says, है वही शेर और तसव्वुफ उसके हक में खूब तर जो छुपा दे उसकी आंखों से तमाशाए हयात. हर नफस डरता हूँ उस उम्मत की बेदारी से मैं कि हकीकत जिसके दीन की एहतिसाब कायनात. मस्त रखो जिक्र फिक्र सुबगाही में उसे पुख्ता तर कर दो मिजाज खानकाही में उसे. So to remind you again, this Majlis Iblis ki Majlis Shura is from the voice of Satan. So Satan is saying that kind of Sufism and poetry is better for them, which hides from their eyes the motions of life. With every breath I dread the awakening of that ummah, whose religion in reality is an accounting of the universe. So it takes the universe seriously and what happens in it seriously. Keep them intoxicated in the worship and prayer of the morning, and strengthen in them the inclinations of monasticism. Being a monk and staying in your monastery and removing yourself from the outside world. No marriage, nothing. Just like focusing solely on inward worship and inward action, but not caring about the world. So Iqbal says that's not a balanced khudi, that's not a balanced Muslim. Yes?
Worship of the morning meal.
He like zikr o fikr subgahi, like
Adhkar.
yeah, morning azkar, in the sense that
It's just theoretical.
it's a motif for perhaps like excessive ritual worship or excessive zikr, but not thinking or caring about the outside world. And Christianity, Buddhism are really good examples of like monastic religions, right? Because they do monasticism really well. Their monks are epic, but their religion also doesn't really have any political or economic relevance as a consequence.
In the same sense, with Dr. Allama Iqbal said that Khuda tujhe kisi tufan se ashna kare.
Mhm.
Khuda tujhe kisi tufan se ashna kare. कि तेरे बहर की मौजों में इस्तिराब नहीं. This is the meaning of khudi. Get better sense in your prayer. Last उसका एक शेर है उसका मैं जो सर पे सजदा हुआ कभी तो जमीन से आने लगी सदा तेरा दिल तो है शर्म आशना तुझे क्या मिलेगा नमाज में. When we say prayer, some many ideas come. So Allama Iqbal said that we should be concentrate upon your prayer.
Sure. Say, thank you for sharing.
Thank you. I have to be unnecessary.
Nay. It's a collaborative session, hopefully. So, to summarize, let's look at Iqbal's. Let's recap Iqbal's critique of the state of Muslims. It's threefold. One, he says that they need to have bigger and more creative and more authentic political horizons. Two, he says that Muslims need to look beyond just letter and ritual and blind imitation. And three, Muslims need to have a spirituality that is engaged with the world, not removed from it. Now, one of the key sort of other ideas that underpins this message is Iqbal's emphasis on creativity. Comes through a creativity and movement, and it comes through in his poetry constantly. And Hasib Bhai can talk a lot about that because he did a diploma in philosophy, right? So Iqbal is very influenced, and Sheikh would also know as well, Iqbal is influenced by a kind of strand of philosophy called process philosophy, which stresses movement and sort of freshness. I don't want to go too deep into it, but let's go deep into it, I guess. So, because I do discuss it. So, in a ghazal from Wale Jibril, Iqbal says, it's one of my favorites. ये कायनात अभी ना तमाम है शायद कि आ रही है दमादम सदाए कुन फयकुन. This universe is perhaps still unfinished, still in motion, for I hear the ongoing sounds of the command of kun fayakun, be and it is, or be and it was. This is the sound that created the universe. And Iqbal says, via this poem, this is an ongoing process. And of course we know, modern science tells us that the universe is ever expanding. It's not a fixed entity. And this is probably something that was sort of uncovered in Iqbal's time, so there may be a connection there with this couplet. Here he's saying, things aren't necessarily fixed. Things may be good, things may be bad, but what matters most is your participation in their making or their unmaking. And he says in the introduction to Asrar-e-Khudi, he says that the universe is not a completed act. It is still in the course of formation. There can be no complete truth about the universe, for the universe has not yet become whole. The process of creation is still going on, and man too takes its share in it, insomuch as he helps to bring order into at least a portion of the chaos. The Quran indicates the possibility of other creators than God. For it says in Surah 23, verse 14, "Blessed is God, the best of those who create." So Iqbal has this idea of humans as they're kind of like sub-creators. God is the ultimate creator, but humans also have a share. They also have this kind of agency in making the world, in taking a stand in how things are or in shaping things. This is also a big part of Iqbal's message and philosophy, and underlines everything he's talking about. So let's finish with a section of Iqbal's, another one of Iqbal's famous nazm, Saki Nama. He says beautifully, I always have trouble with this word. I can never get the do chashme hai, man. Okay. Teherta nahi karavan-e wujud, ke har lehza hai taza shan-e wujud. Samajhta hai tu raz hai zindagi, fakat zawq-e parwaz hai zindagi. The caravan of life tarries not, for in every moment life is renewed. Do you think life's essence a great mystery? No. Life's essence is naught but the desire to soar aloft. The desire to improve and grow and be better. And we can apply this in so many different ways. But I've been reading a book about Islamic philosophy and Sufism in the context of virtue ethics, which is like this idea that the goal of the Muslim is to perfect their inner self. So life's essence is naught but the desire to soar aloft. So this is the core idea in Islamic spirituality and philosophy. We need to work on our inner self, on our nafs, and purify it, and purify it, and purify it, and soar, and soar, and soar, and become, in a sense, more ascended beings, inshallah. Okay. So, does anyone have any thoughts or comments, questions?
I mean, earlier at the beginning, we were talking about how freedom, goodness, are kind of the same thing. So it's very similar, right? Purifying and then soaring. I was just connecting. Remember that?
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah. Say. Anyone else?
I have a thought to share. When you were saying about how, I forgot it was this, basically, how the Europeans separated education to secular and religious realms. And I think it was, I want to say, Sir William Churchill that I saw a quote from that said, if you educate a society without teaching them principles, you're raising sophisticated criminals. And that kind of reminds me of
actions or in your familial relations. There's no religion. One of the unfortunate phenomenon, going back to your point, is that you have all these bright, industrious Muslims in the Muslim world studying the secular sciences, but the ethical assumptions of those sciences are non-Islamic or are materialist or are very far removed from the true ethical message of Islam. And then when they look at Islam, unfortunately represented by the mullah phenomenon, it's a very strange and unfortunate disconnect. And there are a lot of people, and I speak for Pakistan because that's my context, who have gone far from religion because religion is presented in not a great way, and the context has a lot of problems. But I just wish they could see religion maybe like we do it in the West. Actually, sometimes we do it better, alhamdulillah, in a kind of near-traditional setting. We have the freedom and capacity to do it with less of the baggage, I think. Yeah. Ji.
There's a very beautiful point of Iqbal. He says that Lenin Khuda ke huzur mein.
Yes.
So it's he's basically dreaming that the Lenin goes to after death he goes to Khuda, and then there's a conversation between Lenin and that. So there are very beautiful verses in that. है दिल के लिए मौत मशीनों की हुकूमत, एहसास मरवत को कुचल देते हैं हालात. And then he says that
can you translate?
है दिल के लिए मौत मशीनों की हुकूमत, एहसास मरवत को कुचल देते हैं हालात. he says that this industrialization and this in the world, it's actually it's a killing of the heart. It basically these machines, they destroy the human beings, the feeling. And then he says that है तल्ख तू कादर व आदल है मगर तेरे जहां में है तल्ख बहुत बंदा है मजदूर के औकात कब डूबेगा सरमाया परस्ती का सफीना दुनिया है तेरी मुंतज़िर रोज़ मकाफात. And it's a beautiful, that what I'm referring to the brother, what he was saying, that it looks like it's this education and this industrialization and this development. It looks very bright and looks very tempting, but actually it's the humanity goes under it, and it's all this development which the West has done, it's the materialistic, and the human being is being killed under it. So
spiritual values are going to be diminished due to that very inventions.
Iqbal wants to, so he as I said, he's an equal opportunity critic. So he sees the West doing great on a number of fronts and not doing great on other fronts, and he wants to kind of like capture the energy that he sees in the West, but he wants to channel it into the ethics of Islam. That's kind of ultimately his message, I think. Yeah.
He says the Europe में बहुत रोशनी है, इल्म हुनर है, हक ये है कि है चश्मा ही वहाँ पे ज़ुल्मात.
So it's the truth that Europe has much skill and much excellence in manufacturing and crafts and in ingenuity. But what's the last line, Abu?
हक ये है कि है चश्मा ही वहाँ पे है ज़ुल्मात.
But the truth is also that this is hard to translate. क्या तर्जुमा होगा इसका?
The translation is that, but the reality is that humanity is under the darkness.
Right. Okay, Bismillah. We'll finish up. So
I just want to give a shameless plug to three things quickly, because these are the three things that he's critiquing of the Muslim world, and there's three, I think, really important endeavors as an action point for us, I guess, to latch onto. So one thing you mentioned, the term umatics, it's actually a term. Are you familiar with it? Yeah,
yes.
Dr. William Anjum. So he has a website as well where he's trying to also rethink, as it sounds like in the spirit of Iqbal. I don't know if he's as familiar with his work.
Dr. Anjum is also Pakistani, so yeah.
I'm not sure how familiar he is with Iqbal, but he has umatics.com actually. So his whole, you'll see it on the website, he's posting articles and these sorts of things, and he's trying to start some sort of revival within the Muslim world of idea or political entity. The second one is within Islamic education, obviously shameless plug for Yaqeen Institute. A lot of the work that's being put in there is actually just that, particularly some of the work in regards to the existence of God and trying to show an indigenous epistemology. There's a really good article actually, Ibn Taymiyyah's epistemic critique of atheism, that I think is really good. And we're looking to also within science as well. So that's a project that a lot of people are working towards within knowledge. And then the last one is within spirituality. There's a really good series by Shaykh Khatam al-Hajj actually on Manazil al-Sa'ireen. It's 100 stations between a person and Allah. And he often will belabor this point about the fatalism that a lot of Muslims have. And he's trying to basically show a tasawwuf or tazkiyah that's going to be active, focused as well. And it's based on the work of Ibn al-Qayyim, because Ibn al-Qayyim saw himself as a reformer of Sufism, very similar to Iqbal's project. Actually, it's almost like incredible, the parallels, even though they're centuries apart. And I think Iqbal was really influenced by Ibn Taymiyyah Ibn Qayyim, but didn't quote them as much because they were seen as, within the Ibn Abdul Wahhab movement, they would be labeled as a Wahhabi. And so a lot of people actually quote Ibn Taymiyyah without actually mentioning him. And there are a lot of them are influenced by him as well. So that's good as well. That's a YouTube series actually as well. So all this front actually coming and stemming from, you can see Iqbal's kind of hope for the Muslim.
Yeah, mashallah, mashallah. So we'll finish with the dua. Allahumma ya fatir as-samawat wal ard, anta waliyina fi dunya wa akhirah, tawaffana muslimin wa ilhaqna bis salihin. Rabbana zidna ilman, hikmatan, ihsanan wa imanan. Allahumma amin.